Hey, welcome to Security and GRC Decoded. I'm your host, Raj Krishnamurthy. Today we have the fantastic Evan Millman with us. Evan is a manager in Abnormal AI. Abnormal AI deals with analyzing abnormal behavior signals and protecting against email phishing attacks and breaches. He has a very, very interesting background from a political science student. Isn't that right, Evan? From a political science student to a network engineer to a GRC practitioner, an amazing and transformative journey. He's here to talk about all of that and his fresh perspectives on what GRC is. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Raj. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Evan, let's start off with something very interesting. What is one hot take, one controversial opinion that you have of security or GRC and GRC?
Sure. So I guess my first controversial opinion would be, and I don't think maybe this isn't too controversial because I'm sure plenty of people share this, but compliance does not equal security. And I say that as somebody who's a GRC professional. Just because you can pass an audit doesn't actually mean that a control is preventing risk to an organization, right? A lot of these frameworks that we all kind of audit against or report against, they're really more foundational. And I understand why a lot of organizations view them as like the ultimate goal, but they really are not the ultimate goal. They're really just like the start. They're really just the foundation for building a practical, risk-adverse cyber program. So I think, organizations, so my hot take would be, organizations who put too much pressure on achieving whether that's an ISO certification, NIST, getting your SOC 2 report, putting too much pressure on that, I think takes your eyes off the prize of truly creating a secure, risk-adverse environment.
But then why do people do
it? So first off, I would say people do it for two reasons. A, you still need something, right? Like you still need a way for a prospective vendor or a prospective partner or a prospective acquisition partner to assess how your internal policies, procedures, your internal security program is functioning, right? So you still need a way to measure it. So that's like one area where I do feel like these certifications and these reports do provide value because like you need something to measure. And then also from customers too, right? So like a lot of times, it's hard for a prospect of a customer to really know how well your internal security program is made up, how well you are developing code, how well you are locking down access to certain systems or preventing, data from being exfiltrated from your environment. So you need a way to kind of like prove that you're doing something, right? And like the best way to prove to do something probably ends up in these type of reports. But again, I think people who really are really in tuned in the industry know that these reports are just the starting point.
Got it. So I heard two things that you said, which is interesting. One, you said measurement. The other one is advertisement. The way I mean to say it, advertising the measurements. And you also said that people take this with a grain of salt is what I heard. People understand the complexities and the constraints. So to what extent can you believe in these measurements? You deal with this, deal with vendors in your role in abnormal security, and you also deal with customers. So how do you view these measurements from vendors?
Yeah, great question. So I think a lot of that comes down to, and kind of something that we practice at Abnormal, for example, if you take like our third-party risk management program, just seeing that prospective, vendor that we might want to work with has a SOC 2 report, or they're ISO 27001 certified or 27701 certified, or what have you. just seeing that as a checkbox is not enough. You actually need to read that SOC 2 report, like read if there's any report around the ISO certifications, actually dig into the details, like what was in scope, what was out of scope, is the product that you're trying to buy, is it provisioned in an environment that's not even in scope in their ISO report? So actually getting into the details and not just viewing like, oh yeah, they have, they're ISO certified, or oh, they have a SOC 2 report. Like that's not enough. Like you actually have to do more due diligence to go into the weeds to figure out what is that report actually reporting on? What is it actually telling me? And, having knowledge and experience of security in general should put you in a better place of say, okay, yeah, you might have you might have a clean SOC 2 report, but the product that I want to buy from you, that infrastructure is completely scoped out. So like how did that SOC report is now basically meaningless to me. Or maybe there was a finding around, access controls or DLP. How is that then going to relate to, the risk that bringing that potential vendor onto your organization might present, right? So it's more about like, it's not, taking these things with a grain of salt, but diving more into the details, not just having it as a checkbox of like, okay, yeah, you have a certification, like, we're good here. Like, no, like, what does that actually certification mean to that organization?
And by that, do you go back and forth with the vendor, and how much time do you spend if so?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? So like there's a constant pull, and Raj, I've spoken about this before, of like, I'm not somebody who will sit here and like pound my chest and say security knows everything and we should stop whatever we're doing for security. Like at the end of the day, like I work for an organization, a company, and we're not a non-for-profit, right? We're trying to sell a valuable product to a market and ultimately make money. So there's always going to be a pull with security best practices and what's in the best interest for an organization for a slew of other reasons, right? So you have to try, right? Like I always say to my team, like, our job is not to fix anything. Our job is to use our knowledge and experience to find where there are flaws, where there are risks, where there are vulnerabilities, properly document them, properly understand them, and report that to the people that need to make this, more complex business decisions. Our job is really to present the people, the business leaders, with our perspective. It's not to make decisions. It's not to change things, while, caveat, of course, GRC and security can be a conduit to change things. But our job is really more to observe, report, and advise.
So you're saying GRC is an observability layer for security and engineering operations.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's how I view it. Yeah, 100%. Like, it's not ultimately, I can, again, back to, third-party risk management. There might be some tool that our engineering team might want to start to use that will exponentially speed up the way in which we can deliver code to like the production environment. My team might get that vendor and do an analysis and say, oh, well, it's open source software, and they're really new and they don't really patch their vulnerabilities, and like there's a lot of risk here. But we might have told customers or the industry at large, like, hey, we are going to be delivering these next 3 new features to our product by September. And there might be a decision that has to be made of like, okay, well, if this tool is going to help us reach that business goal, is it worth to stop everything and not proceed because security found some type of risk? Or is the business decision going to be made of like, hey, noted, let's not forget about this. Let's figure out a way to remediate that or decrease that risk with some type of compensating control or some type of contract language. But ultimately, we're going to procure this tool. We're going to use this tool. So like ultimately, like we are not like we shouldn't stop business from doing the things that it needs to do, but we should be a partner to help and make sure that we are making informed business decisions. Is guess how I would put it.
That's a great point. And this third party risk management toil that you're talking about with your vendors, how does that influence how you deal with your customers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. So like, it's kind of like you want to practice what you preach, right? So when we are so strict or raise red flags because we find some prospective vendor that we want to use, they don't enforce MFA, or they're not using it's reported that they're not using a password manager, or they're not using TLS 1.3 at this point. It's hypocritical, right? If we were to call something out on a vendor that we want to use and say, hey, that's too big of a risk that we don't want to use it. But if we're not doing those things ourselves, it's like it kind of leaves us in like that almost like, yeah, again, like a hypocritical type of state of like,
I was going to say that I was trying to contain, but you're absolutely right. Hypocritical is the right term to use, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like, like we, and again, but that goes back to business decisions, right? So like, again, us as GRC professionals, as security professionals, our job is to observe, report, get that information into the business owners. But at the same time, like that also should be how we drive certain initiatives internally. Like, oh, hey, like if we're concerned about our vendors not using the latest, level of encryption, shouldn't we make sure that we ourselves are using the latest level of encryption? It's like you don't have a leg to stand on. You're not being truthful. You're not being honest. If, you're going to tell somebody that like, hey, I don't like what you're doing, but I'm not doing that myself for whatever reason. If you're not doing that yourself, that's fine. But then how my team would view that type of risk should obviously be decreased, right? Like it should be at a level of like, okay, sure, that's something of concern for us, but since considering that we don't do that ourselves, we don't really have a leg to stand on to like force somebody else to do it.
Makes sense. And I think you touched on a very interesting point. GRC as an observability layer to security and engineering operations. The fundamental question is that the cadence with which these teams operate. For example, you're a technology first company, you're a cloud native company, you operate on Uber and rapid scale, you're making thousands of releases per week, right? Versus your assessment comes very less frequent, once a week, once a quarter, once a year. How do you match these cadences?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, right? Actually, I think it's kind of something that I think is in the ethos of Compliance Cow, of like getting to a state where audits are not a point in time type of thing, that it's constantly occurring all the time. And that's something that we're trying to work on internally at Abnormal is, the foundation of that is making control owners know and own their own controls, right? Like security is really everybody's responsibility. Just like practicing good business ethics, just like practicing good like accounting, ethics, like security is everybody's responsibility. It's not just the security team. It's not just the GRC team. And the more that you can instill that culture foundationally into a company that everybody's responsible here in some way to that, I think that kind of like pushes the button a little bit to hit that, cadence where like, hey, like we're continuing to push you, like you said, thousands of releases like in a short period of time. But hey, we're only auditing once, twice a year. Like, so how do you square that? You square that by like making the engineering teams feel more responsible for controls. And then honestly, and we've touched on this before where, I love my highway analogy, right? Like my car can go a lot faster than the 65 mile per hour speed limit that's on a highway. But there's a reason that there's a speed limit on a highway because of years of research and data. Governments figured out that it's a safety issue, that if you do not exceed a certain threshold in your speed, the percentage risk of an accident happening decreases. So if you think about that in terms of like technology and security, maybe we don't have to push, so many updates as quickly as possible. Maybe there is a little bit of resetting expectations. This constant need to put your pedal to the metal, as like the expression goes, maybe loses sight of some security best practices. And I think that there's probably a happy medium there.
Got it. Got it. So you're saying that there has to be a balance between how quickly we push and obviously consequently break versus how secure we are. Yeah, but you're not advocating that you stop. You're not advocating at the cost of innovation. You're advocating at the right balance.
Absolutely not. I hate traffic just as anybody else, right? To go back to my analogy, right? Like 100% you shouldn't stop. And frankly, we've all been on a road where the speed limit doesn't make sense, right? Or it's super late at night and there's nobody on the road, and like, okay, if I go 75 or if I'm touching 80 here, like no harm, no foul kind of thing. So like there is always exceptions. There's always ways to cut out. And yeah, absolutely not. Again, it goes back to like, I'm somebody who believes like ultimately the business purpose is what's going to drive decisions, right? It's a business decision. It's not a security decision. Everything is a business decision. And yeah, maybe for a company pushing code out very fast in a short amount of time, maybe that is in the business's best interest. But then I would argue, then you need to have a robust compensating control to make sure you're not just completely forgetting about security. Because what happens is you just accumulate a ton of tech debt, right? So like then all of a sudden one day you want to take patching vulnerabilities seriously, and you just have a backlog that's almost like unworkable, right? It's just like, where do you even begin? And then you want to sign, and then your company picks up speed and you want to sign bigger and bigger customers, and they're going to start requiring that you have all your criticals patched within 72 hours kind of thing. And you're almost like, your speed sometimes takes your eye off the sight of there are other factors in play here, right? So like if you do need to kind of push code out to production in an expedited manner, you got to make sure that you're accounting for that in some manner.
Got it. And you said that when we talked about the cadence, you said that you wanted to see the control owners being more accountable. If I'm the engineer sitting in, building the product, right, or even in security engineering, I am on a go basis, right? This may sound blunt, but I care the least about compliance or governance or risk in some ways.
100%.
How do you build that cultural change? How do you bring that cultural change so that they do care?
it starts from the top down, right? Like it has to be. It has to be senior leaders, your CTO, your CIO, your CISO. They have to make it your responsibility. They have to make you want to care, right? Like I've never worked on an engineering team. It's outside of my level of comfort, but how they are evaluated, how your personal performance review is evaluated from a engineering perspective is obviously in a way could it be a lot more quantitative than maybe somebody like on my team, which is a little bit more qualitative, right? Because we're working on projects and procedures and policies, and like there's not a lot of like, okay, how many lines of code did you push like to production? Like there's actually like tangible quantitative things that you can actually measure on an engineer to measure performance. Like I would argue that from the top down, some measure should be also like how secure is your code? Like, did you how many times did you stray away from like our SSDLC? How many times did you push code to production that might have had some type of vulnerability in it? Listen, of course, sometimes you don't know, right? These things, you can push code to production and think everything is kosher and clean, but 6 months down the line, there's some new exploit that like found that like you just don't know about. Like, of course, that's going to happen. But just instilling that culture that again, that like everybody is responsible. They're like, yes, I get it. As an engineer, all you care about is closing out your Jira ticket and making sure that that you fulfilled the requirement through whatever code that you needed to edit or create new. But like I would also argue that if you really have a security minded culture at an organization, part of that is also, am I doing everything possible that before I push code to production, that it, as per today's standards right now, that is as secure as it possibly can be.
Got it. And what do you see is the role of GRC teams in those measurements, in those measuring those drifts?
Yeah. So again, it's kind of that like observer and auditor, right? Like I want to say like in a way, GRC team is kind of like the referees, right? Out there. So we should be observing the game that's going on or the work that's being done and reporting on where we see issues or where we don't see, or vulnerabilities that pop up and working to remediate that, right? But again, it's not working in a matter of let's drop everything because I found these 3 critical vulnerabilities and stop pushing code to production because we need to fix these first. It's more, okay, we noticed, we observed these risks. Who do we need to talk to address these? How do we get these addressed as soon as possible without disrupting our overall business goals?
Got it. And Evan, how do you see governance, risk, and compliance and the dependencies between them and the interplay with security?
Sure. So, I mean, governance is kind of like what we alluded to just now, like is us being that like that traffic cop, that referee to kind of like make sure that teams, whether that's your accounting team or your people ops team or your engineering teams, are adhering to security best practices, our own internal policies and procedures, right? So like that's like the governance aspect of it. The risk aspect of it is when we find somebody or some team or some process that strays away from either our internal policies and procedures or security best practice. Our job then would be to observe that, record that, figure out a way to remediate that and work with the appropriate stakeholders to ultimately, to close out that gap. Then the compliance comes in from kind of a combination of ensuring that we're adhering to policies and procedures, and then, just very bluntly, like making sure that we're aligned with our whatever standards that, the organization, for example, we go for ISO 27001, like making sure that there is nothing that's being done at the organization that would potentially cause us to have some type of finding from an audit. So, like observing and being that traffic cop, reporting, and finding out ways to remediate issues from like a risk perspective, and then making sure that it all falls in line, that we can kind of tell a clear and concise story to the street, is kind of where I guess the compliance aspect would come in.
Got it. And what role does, maybe it's a cheesy question, but what role does automation and continuous controls monitoring play in that view?
Oh, everything, right? Because like ultimately, the hardest part about security is always going to be people, right? You just simply like, machines are just faster, no more, than all of us combined, right? And certainly AI is right at the forefront of that. Constantly being able to check on things, constantly being able to audit things. I think that does two really important things. Like I think that instills really good behavior, right? Like I have a 4-year-old at home. We never like we my wife and I, we're not big on like baby proofing our house. Like we really never did that. But how did my, son and now my daughter, how did they learn, like don't touch the stove when it's on, like don't go down the steps, is through when no one's around, is through repeated behavior of don't touch that, don't touch that, don't touch that. Eventually, like that gets ingrained, like they're not going to touch it anymore because they just know not to touch that. So like I think if you take that same kind of methodology and apply it to, to businesses, like, okay, don't push code unless it's gone through this review. Don't push code till it's gone through this review. Eventually people are going to be like, if I do that, like Evan and his team is going to find out eventually and slap me on the wrist again. So I'm just not going to do that. So it's like through learned behavior, I think is really what kind of helps drive change, I guess, if you will.
And you see automation as the means to enforce that, bring about that change.
Yeah, so automation, I think, could help by, right? Like again, like I can't always be observing, right? Like my team, you're always going to have limited human resources, right? So automated checks can really help and be that like the tentacles from like my team that's like out there observing in the wild, right? Like I'm not going to have somebody who's like constantly sitting in our prod environment, like checking code to make sure it's compliant, or making sure that every time everybody sends a sensitive document outside of our organization, that they're making sure it's being encrypted, using an encrypted source. So like, of course, my team is never going to be able to check and observe everything, which is where things like automation really come into play, because then you have like machines or technology better that's helping you to achieve that goal, that's helping you to maybe put up a guardrail, or preventing you from pushing code to production because you haven't done X, Y, and Z, or it's constantly monitoring, an environment to see something, to see some type of vulnerability. So the automation kind of really helps to be the eyes, and ears, and kind of stopgap where kind of humans resources, would lack.
One thing we constantly hear is that this one size fits all automation does not fit anybody, right? To be honest, and because every company has their own contextual process, it is driven by their own threats, by their own risks, by their own the environment that they are in. How do you see that? So to what extent do you have to tweak this automation to make it yours?
Yeah, 100%. Like never no human being is the same, right? No organization is the same. There's similarities, but nothing's ever going to be completely black and white, totally the same. So it's very much like I guess I would answer that the same way as how I view like compliance standards, where it's just the foundation, right? But then you have to mature certain controls to better fit your environment. So like automation is the same way, right? It's just the foundation, but then you have to fine tune those automated resources to ensure that they align with ultimately like your control set, with your security posture, with your policies and procedures, with your requirements from your customers, with your requirements from your compliance needs that you have. It to think that you can just take a tool and drop it into every organization because there's some automated workflow that will prevent you from doing X, Y, and Z, it's foolish, right? It's that would come. I would argue anybody making that statement has very little experience in the technology world, right? Like every organization does things a little bit differently, and keeping that in mind, and I think personalizing those type of uh controls to an environment is super important.
So that means that it is a partnership between the GRC teams, the GRC and the other teams, and also the vendor, right? From a tool perspective. Is that correct?
Always 100%. Yeah, they're like, I hate but sometimes too much customization can also be a bad thing, right? Like there needs to be some standardization, right? But like 100%, like when you're procuring like a security tool, it's not it's not a one size fits all. We had a customer on a call the other day, and I forgot what the exact quote was, but something along the lines of like that he like security vendors should stop telling him what problems he needs to solve and just give him solutions, right? Like if you're coming out with some product or you have some new tool that has some new level of automation or whatever, like, and you just blindly call an organization and think that like your tool is going to solve their problems, you're just so naive to actually what happens, right? Like, and listen, I get it. I'm not in sales, so like I know that sometimes like there is no other way, right? Like I get it. Like my friends who are in sales would argue with me that like, hey, actually by the numbers, like you still can like receive some level of traction, some positive feedback by just cold calling people and just like telling them that they have a problem that like you can fix. Like I get it. But again, just like with everything, you got to take it with a grain of salt, right? So like, but really, you don't know if that tool or that product is right for that organization, is going to solve any of their problems, is not going to just be, implemented and never used. That's the biggest thing that I hate when when we're doing analysis, from like a third party risk management perspective of what tools are we using? Like how many software tools do we buy that we never used because somebody on the sales end was on, took us to a Yankee game and, promised us that, this XYZ tool will do everything and solve all of our problems. Like, no, like the only ones who really know who can solve all your problems is yourself, right? Like you have to be self-aware as an organization, as a mature organization. You should be self-aware of like what really are the challenges and what tools can help me fix those challenges. And maybe there are tools and automation, that can help with it, and maybe there aren't. But always like a vendor should be working hand in hand. There should be a problem that needs to be solved in order to procure some new fancy tool, whether it's written with AI or automation or not. Like there should be a problem that you need to solve, and that's why you need to get something. Otherwise, like sometimes simple is better, right? Sometimes not having something and just going about it the way that you're doing. Sometimes just using a boring old spreadsheet
Yeah.
it is just like sometimes that just works for a certain organization, right? It's not a one size fits all thing. And I get that that's hard for software vendors to hear because they want to think that everybody is a prospective customer, but like that's just not honest. Like that's just not real to me.
To everybody their own.
Exactly.
And this partnership requires investment from you, investment from your teams, investment from other teams. How do you go build that business case with your leadership?
Yeah, it's hard. So, again, I think, I like to look at everything, from a risk perspective and a business perspective, right? So like a mature organization will have a robust risk management program where you will constantly be assessing, reporting, and analyzing risks to an organization. Like this is in my head how it should work, right? And then based off of those risks, we the appropriate stakeholders would discuss what remediation actions are needed to combat those risks, to remediate those risks. Based off of that, then you might need to go out and procure a tool or enhance a policy or procedure. And then because you went through that whole process of somebody reporting on a risk, talking about those risks with key stakeholders, everybody agreeing that, yes, that's something that we need to fix, that kind of like alleviates some of the tension when you want to then go procure a new tool just out of nowhere where somebody's like, well, why? We have all of these like committed projects for the next 3 quarters. Like we don't have time to do an evaluation. We don't have time to do a business case because you kind of put the cart before the horse there, right? Like, so if you were operating more from like a risk governance perspective, and you bake into your project planning and your workload for the next quarter or the quarter after that you need to remediate X, Y, and Z risk, and we're thinking about changing this procedure, and we're thinking about buying a product that does something like this, that will help drive that buy-in from the stakeholders that need to have buy-in to make that process go quicker.
Got it. And I think most of us are becoming from cloud first companies to AI first companies. What is your view? And how does, particularly with respect to what you're doing in GRC even?
Yeah. So, AI first, AI's awesome and exciting and scary at the same time, right? I was in a meeting recently where somebody, a very senior level person at the organization, was basically like, before having this meeting with me, you should dump all of your questions into a chatbot and you should send that over to me, and I will then have that chatbot analyze and answer those questions based off of my historic work, essentially alluding to the fact that like his chat GPT or Claude instance knows more about him and the work that his team is doing than he does himself. So like when you think of it from that perspective, like it's like mind blowing of like, wow, how amazing these AI tools can be. But like you can't help but think of like, okay, well, what else does that chatbot know about you? Like where is privacy considerations in there? What if your chatbot has access to highly confidential business IP? that would obviously be a huge concern. I think, we are in a stage right now where businesses and organizations, AI, like want to just dive into like AI and all these cool things that AI can do. And it is really cool, and it saves tons of time. I tell my team all the time to be using these tools because it really does save time where where tasks that used to take hours now can take minutes. But at what cost, right? I think that not enough is being done to consider and understand the cost, right? Like nothing's free. Just like, I love like people, like my parents would like, novel of like, how is like Gmail for free, right? It's like, well, you don't fundamentally understand if a tool is for free, that means that you're the product. Like Google doesn't just want to give you an email client for the hell of it, right? Like they're not just giving it because they're nice and like and philanthropic. They're giving it to you for a purpose, right? And it's the same thing of when these AI tools are collecting all of this information about you. Yeah, that has a really cool use case that you can use and you can feel, but what are they doing with your data at the back end? Like those are the questions that I think we still have yet to answer.
Well, I think it sounds very dark, but the way that it was running through my head is that they're not selling to you, but they're selling you, is what you're saying.
100%. 100%. Like it's scary, right? But like, think about it. Like, Meta, like they're in the business of making money. They don't just care that you like share your photos with your friends and family. Like they're not as as great as you want to like, put these tech leaders on a pedestal. Like they're not trying to give away things for free. And it's the same thing with AI, right? Like, and listen, we do everything that we can internally to ensure that we are comfortable with the tools and technology that we use. We document risks, we evaluate risks, we make sure that there's no shadow IT going on where like teams are just procuring this tool or that tool. So we do practice what we preach at Abnormal, and we do try and mitigate those risks as much as possible. But it is certainly a question, right? Like it again to me comes back to like business and risk decisions. Like there are some risky behaviors that organizations are always going to choose to do because it's in the best interest of the organization, right? There's multiple ways to treat a risk that's identified, and one of those is just accepting it. And like that, sometimes that is okay. But again, accepting a risk, I think is a product. A mature organization accepts a risk when they have fully documented and fully evaluated a risk, but ultimately decided that like going ahead and still using that tool or still procuring that product has a greater the benefit to the business outweighs the risk. And so ultimately, like it's all about making sure we document and observe and providing that information and making informed business decisions.
Got it. And particularly on this topic of AI and the AI for security and the security for AI, how do you see the frameworks like ISO 27001, ENISA, CSA recently has had this AI governance framework? What do you see as the role of these frameworks and the maturity of adoption?
Yeah, so or like the new ISO 42001 that came out about last year. Again, like just like with all other compliance standards, it's the same way, right? It's the foundation. Those type of certifications or frameworks, they're helping to build a framework where you're forcing engineering teams to monitor how code gets pushed to production, to have compensating controls, to do audits, to make sure that there's no biasy in your code, in your AI. So these frameworks help to build those basic building blocks. But just like with any other certification, I would argue that's just the beginning, right? Like that should just be the table stakes. That should just be what gets you in the door. What makes you a more successful organization in terms of your risk management or your security posture is taking those and then elaborating on them. So taking the requirement from a framework and implementing that, but then going a step further and making sure that you are doing more than just what is required. That is really, I think, the role in which these certifications play. Like without them, I would argue probably we wouldn't be doing a lot of anything, right? So like it's the same thing, like back to like the highway analogy. Like if we had no speed limits, everybody, it would be the Autobahn, right? Like everybody would just be going like 100 miles an hour. I get to get to my friend's house or to back to go visit my parents as quickly as humanly possible, and I'm going to go as fast as I possibly can. But like there's a lot of risk there, right? That's not safe, to put it quite frankly. And so I think what these frameworks are starting to do is to help to build the guardrails, to help to build the auditability of these AI development programs so that we can decrease risk, right? You're never, ever going to get to a place where there is no risk. People like me wouldn't have a job if like we were ever in a place where there was no cyber risk. But we can get to a place where we can manage it and control it. And I think that's where these frameworks help to build those foundational blocks.
Got it. And if I were to paraphrase the Spider-Man quote, I think with increasing speed comes increasing responsibility. Right? So
Exactly. Absolutely.
And traditionally, I think the GRC teams were left behind in terms of how models were developed, how models were deployed. I'm talking about the machine learning models, right? Do you think that is changing? Is there more sort of responsibility or accountability with the GRC teams? Are there more things happening with the GRC teams right now than before?
I think we're trying to. I fear though that like not enough. Just like the early days of the internet, when you never really considered that, I'm Evan Millman and I'm going to create a username or an email address that has nothing to do with my name, or sign on to a social media platform and pretend to be you, Raj, right? Like I can get your picture from the internet. I could take your first name and last name and create an account, and there's nothing that is preventing me from doing that, right? They're like access control and authentication and authorization was an afterthought at the beginning phases of the internet, and now we're left with what we have now, right? Which is where, I mean, what's the latest statistic that like more than half the accounts on Twitter, on X are all bots, right? Like you're not like, you might think that you're interacting with somebody who's real, but like you're not. And like there's really no way to properly govern that because authentication and authorization was just not built into like how we think about what the internet is today. I fear that we're doing similar with AI. I think probably marginally better because I want to think that sometimes we learn from our past mistakes, but the speed in which some of these AI tools and models are being developed, it leaves question marks in my head of like, are we actually repeating our mistakes of the past in just like the new iteration for the current times, or have we learned? And I think the jury's still out there.
Got it. And it's a very, I think it's an interesting world situation in the GRC world, right? On one hand, you're dealing with machine learning data engineers, data scientists, machine learning developers, right? And large language model and large reasoning models are getting added to the mix. You're dealing with cloud infrastructure engineers, platform engineers, DevOps teams that actually are operating at a rapid clip on tools like Kubernetes, right? Platforms like Kubernetes and cloud. And then you're dealing with all the security tools and the plethora of tools that are coming about. How much do the GRC teams need to be technical in order to deal with this stuff?
Yeah, great question. It's honestly a hard question to answer because I could argue it from both ends, right? Like I can argue it from the end of the GRC teams don't really need to be technical because they are just the referees, right? And they're just trying to call balls and strikes, right? Like an NBA referee doesn't need to know the technique behind shooting a free throw shot, right? Like they just don't. But they need to know that, like, oh, your feet need to be behind the line, right? So, like, GRC teams, you could argue, need to know the rules, and so that we can observe and report about them. However, I could also argue that if you did know how to the more and more technical that you are, the more robust conversations you can have with these teams, right? So like the easier it is to have these teams like let their guard down and really bring you into the fold, the easier it is to earn respect. So like, do they need to know? Can they be effective in their jobs without being technical? No. But does a culture, a more dispersed culture of security, is that a product when GRC teams, when the people who are calling ball and strikes actually know the pain points that these teams are delivering? Yeah, I'd argue it's hard to argue against that, right? I mean, can we still be effective and do our jobs well? Yes, absolutely. But potentially there is a stronger partnership when you can talk about, EC2 clusters and Kubernetes and all these, deep in the weeds technical topics when GRC teams can talk about them, with engineering.
No, makes sense. So the referee doesn't have to be a league player, but they should at least know how to play ball.
Absolutely. Again, it's not to say like it has to be that way, right? Like you can still be effective without being that way. It just might be harder, right? You might take you longer to win over certain teams, to gain their respect, right? Like people, it's a people, I honestly say like that to me is a little bit more of a people problem, right? Like if I am the lead architect, at an organization, why I'm more prone to want to work with somebody that I respect, understands the pain points that I'm going through, right? It goes back to that, like, just because I'm in security doesn't mean that I can pout my chest and say like, I know better than everybody else. Like you actually don't. And like, there might be things and issues that pop up that you can't anticipate because you don't have the technical know-how, because you don't know what they have to deal with in order to reach their business goals. So like, I think having GRC teams being more technical, or at least being able to talk the talk, right? You don't have to walk the walk, but you definitely have to talk the talk, helps build those personal connections with the engineering teams that will ultimately help them buy into your initiatives and the things that you're trying to prove to get across the finish line, and ultimately build that culture of security across the whole environment.
And how, in your view, Evan, how do you think other teams view GRC? Engineering, security.
Yeah. So I'd say it's a mixed bag. I've worked with engineers who like very clearly, like day and night, see GRC as a partner, as a necessary component in order to achieve a common business goal. Like absolutely, whether that's reporting on risk, or driving in certain initiatives, or making sure that we're compliant with certain standards. They see it as like a necessary partner, and and a willing and able partner. Just like how you were talking before about like, hey, an engineer, like they're just really concerned about getting their job done, pushing code out to production, like doing what they have to do. And maybe they're not thinking about all these security or compliance ramifications. Whereas like the GRC team is thinking about like, well, if we want to sign on this huge household name customer to our product, they're requiring us to do A, B, and C. And engineering teams, you're not doing that. So like we're going to observe and call out when you're not, so that we can point it out so that you can remediate that. And where an engineer might just like not have the bandwidth, or just might not be thinking that way. So like 100%. However, also like we can be, the one who's imposing, the speed limit, right? Like maybe they want to push out for a very crude analogy, like 1,000,000 lines of code, a day. And GRC comes in and says, hey, actually, that's too risky. Like we only can push out like 100,000 like lines of code a day. Right away, like we're going to be the scapegoat. Like we're going to be the roadblock that's preventing teams from achieving their goals. So it's important when those situations come up to really partner with engineering teams. And it's not just engineering teams, right? This could be legal, accounting, people ops. Like it's not just, I like to remind people that like, GRC is not there just to monitor and be a traffic cop for just IT and engineering, but it's really across the whole organization. It's honestly one of the reasons that I love the GRC space so much, is because like one day I'm talking to the chief architect, the next day I'm talking to the our chief, our head general counsel, like the next day I'm talking to the head of like people ops. Like literally, I mean, maybe only the CEO has that type of cross communication with across all departments as like the GRC team does. So it's really important when GRC teams are kind of viewed as that roadblock, that they build relationships. I'm a big believer in like a lot of it is just like it's the soft skills sometimes that matter so much in GRC. It's just connecting with people. And like, so again, sometimes that's easier because like I can sit in your shoes and I know what you're talking about when you're talking to me about Kubernetes or EC2 instances or what have you. But it's building relationships, and it's making other teams or departments understand where you're coming from and why you're doing certain things. The why is so important in GRC. It's not just because I said so. It's not just because Evan knows more about security, because Evan has his master's or his CISSP, because I'm security expert. Like nobody cares about that. The why comes from Evan explaining like, hey, I know you're super busy, and I know that this is going to put a load on your team, and this might slow you guys down. But we're trying to sign this client, and they need us to do X, Y, and Z, and they need us to be compliant with this standard, or they have their own internal standard that they need us to be compliant with. And we all are on the same team, right? Our mission, our goal is all one. And we're just trying to help ensure that we achieve that goal together. So the why sometimes in GRC is so vitally important.
That's beautifully said. So I think what you're basically saying is knowledge builds empathy. Empathy builds relationships. Relationships build conviction for everybody
100%.
else to do the right thing. Beautiful. So you, I think, as we said earlier, as I said earlier, Evan, you actually have a very, very interesting journey, right? You started as a paralegal, went and worked as a network engineer, and then, we did a consulting thing on security, and then you're now the head of GRC, or leading the GRC program at Abnormal. What would you say to somebody who wants to be the next Evan, trying to follow your footsteps, and from different walks of life, trying to get into GRC? What would your advice be to them?
I mean, as a joke, I would say, maybe major in computer science or something more technical in undergrad to like have a foot up on engineers. In the early stages, I would say, it don't close the doors to any opportunities, right? So basically, like, long story short, my journey was, I was a political science major at undergrad, and I wanted to go to law school. And I was advised, not to go to law school right away out of college, and to kind of work in the legal industry for a little bit and see if it was really something that I liked. So I worked as a paralegal, mostly like at real estate law firms. And I went and I sat for my LSATs, and I had a good GPA and I had a good LSAT score. And there was just a gap between when like law school would start and like when I was done with my test. So I was like, you know what? Like, I love learning. Like, my wife would joke that, like, if I could, like, if being a student could be a profession, like, sign me up. Like, I love going back to school and all that stuff. So I was like, all right, let me see what else. I've always been interested in technology. My parents would, my family would allude to, like, I've always been, I want the first iPhone that comes out, the first this that comes out, like that's just, always kind of been in my nature. So like, I've always loved and had an admiration for technology. So in that gap, I was like, you know what, I've never considered it. I was like, let me go see if there's like a course I can take. I know, just like general in computers. And I signed up for a postgraduate program at a local college by my parents in CIS, and I loved it. And it was like, I think my GPA from that program was like exponentially higher than my already very respectable GPA from undergrad. And why was because I was just like interested. Like, I just like, it was cool. Like, when I learned like C++ and I coded a computer program that was like a calculator, I was like, this is so cool. Like, I instantly like learning becomes a lot easier when you're actually interested in the material, right? So I finished up that program, and then I was like, you know what, like, why do I want to go to law school? Like, the why, like, a lot of it comes back to, again, like, the why, like, what was the purpose? So I actually decided not to go to law school, and I did some networking. And how the story goes is, I was dating, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, had a friend who worked at a telecom company. And like, when I was when I was in this program at CIS, doing this CIS program, I was like, telecom, like, that seems so boring. Like, who cares about like the telephone lines and like all that stuff in the street? Like, of course, like, that's me being a complete novice, because like, telecom is vitally important. And if everybody understood that ultimately everything is connected by a hard wire somewhere, some way, fiber lines down in the middle of the ocean, like, it gets really complicated and really cool and interesting. And so like, I took a phone call, and I instantly hit it off with this person. He's actually still a good friend and mentor of mine. And it just kind of like opened the door to a career in technology. And that's when I went and became a network engineer. And, my mentor, he actually had a background in security. So he's the one who actually kind of pushed me into the security realm once he saw me going for my Network Plus, my CCNA, and like all that stuff, and just kept on excelling. And he was like, hey, like, you should try where like the industry is moving towards, more security. So then, I went for all my security certifications and Security Plus and CISSP and all that fun stuff. And so I guess and then ultimately I had the experience in technology and then a bit of the security background to then warrant a role that's more directly in security. And so then I started my journey in security, and then I fell into GRC because, again, like from my background, I'm not super technical. Can I talk to our engineers, like we were alluding to before? Sure. Do you want me, behind like a command line during the day? Like probably not. Not where my strong suit is. But that's why I like GRC, because I always felt it was like a good mix of that kind of like business, soft skill, adaptation, and also that technical knowledge. It was like a good mix for me. And then sprinkle in kind of like my experience in the legal industry, and like GRC just kind of like was like the Venn diagram, the thing in the middle, just like always seemed to be GRC. Like, could I have gone back and studied and become, pursued a more technical path? Absolutely. But like, it just fit in my personality and my experience. So I guess I would tell anybody who's trying to be the next Evan Millman, to keep trying, right? To never, you never know what conversation, what door, where that's going to lead to. I remember when I was trying to get into the security space, I was meeting with anybody and everybody. I mean, I remember meeting with like this partner from like PwC and this person from this consulting company and this one, and like just using your network. It's sad, but like that's the way of the world, right? Like sometimes it is who you know. And that's not like in a bad way that like that's going to leave people out, but just in like everybody knows people, right? Like maybe it's a professor that you worked with like at college. Maybe it's somebody that you work out with like at the gym. Like I would say like for somebody who's trying to start out, whether that's like a career in technology or GRC or what have you, it's like the broader reach your network can be, the more opportunity you can find. The easier it is for you to actually find a job and a career path that you will feel fulfilled in, that you will enjoy, that you will want to pursue. So, my best advice would be, never say no to a phone call, never say no to a coffee meetup, never say no to grabbing dinner, even if it's awkward, even if you feel like you're out over your skis, even if you feel like you're not qualified. You just don't know. You don't know the path that you might be on. And I'm somebody who, thoroughly believes like everything happens for a reason, and you can't get to where you're going without hardship, like without failure, without adversity, without figuring things out. Like nothing is easy. Like there is no easy path. Like that's a lie. Like I'm a firm believer in that. Like you have to figure things out yourself, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be carefree, but you have to put in the work and you have to try.
No, that's beautiful. That's a fantastic story, Evan. And I want to give you the last 60 seconds. Any shout out to books, mentors, anybody that you want to call out, right, that has helped you get this far?
Sure. I mean, so I was just saying, a mentor of mine, he's actually one of the CISOs right now at Robinhood, David Schwed, very fascinating person. He was actually, when I met him, he was the general counsel and CIO of the telecom company I worked for. And he's somebody that has really helped me in my career and my career path, and just like been like a great sounding board to this day. And I guess I'd also like give a shout out to my current team. I work with a great group of individuals, whether those are the people who work on my team or even my supervisors, Liz and Mike. They're just like being able to work with people that you trust, that you admire, that you respect, that know more than you, is just worth so much gold. I'm so grateful for the position that I'm in right now and the opportunities that I have, everything going on at Abnormal, just the industry that I'm in. It's just every time I talk to somebody, they're like, I was out last night with a couple guys from the neighborhood. We went to a place to go play golf at night. And instantly I was like, when I was talking to somebody new, I was like, what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm in cybersecurity. They're like, wow, like everybody's like lights, their eyes light up. So just, I'm totally grateful for like where I am and where my career path has led me. So, definitely some shout outs there. Books, it's funny because I remember, in interviews, throughout my career, there was always that question, okay, like, what do you do to stay up with like industry trends? I could rattle off, Cyberwire daily podcasts that I listen to once in a while, or like the Krebs on security emails that I get, or, the organizations that, you're involved in. But honestly, there's so much information out there. If you just follow the right organizations on Twitter, on LinkedIn, there's just like, you don't even need to have like one source anymore. It's just like there's so much out there that if you just stop and listen, it's just all right in front of everybody. So like, yeah, I can't emphasize enough how much tools like LinkedIn or social media also play a part in just keeping myself, and I think most people these days, up with like the latest trends in the IT world.
Got it. Evan, this was a fascinating conversation, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Raj. Really appreciate it.